Look to the parts of your climbing where you can humble yourself, because they're probably going to be the areas of your climbing that will teach you the most. I think the lessons that we don't want to learn are probably the lessons that we need to learn the most.
Hey y'all, welcome back to The Struggle. It's me, Ryan, your host. I'm happy you're here. Hope you're having an awesome day. And I'm really excited to share this episode with y'all today with Hannah Morris. Hannah, not only having a palindrome for her first name, which is always a great place to start a podcast interview, but you all probably know her from her incredibly successful YouTube channel, Hannah Morris Bouldering. She's got like 130-some thousand subscribers, millions and millions and millions of views of her videos. And I think what makes Hannah so popular is how accessible she is, how real she is. She's a real climber. This is what I found so refreshing about this conversation, because I always talk to the strongest climbers in the world, the most talented, the most accomplished climbers in the world, and Hannah is a real climber. Now, she's climbing the grades that I'm climbing or that I'm wanting to climb or hoping to climb. I think she boulders like up to V7 maybe or V8. I'm not quite there myself, but it's attainable. It's not a V15 or a V16 that I also find incredibly inspiring. And I talk to a lot of those athletes and I glean a lot from those conversations. But Hannah's videos on her YouTube channel, as well as this conversation, I think what makes it so good is that it's so real and her journey's real. She just likes to mostly have fun. She's not like a super geek about training, but she's done these wild experiments on herself. Like she trained like a pro for 40 days. We dove into that experiment and the results were pretty impressive. They were pretty shocking, in fact. And so we talk about that. We talk about a lot of the work that she's done with Coach B and Louis Parkinson and some of the big athletes that she's had on her show as well. Again, she, like me, is an explorer, not an expert. And so when she interacts with some of the best athletes in the world on her channel, it's a really interesting dynamic. And I've learned a ton from like practical advice from watching her videos, but also I've just really enjoyed watching her journey as a climber, as she's mostly out there to just have fun, but also to get better. She's pretty driven, and we dive into that in this episode. And the format of this episode kind of took a left turn right from the start. I was intending to follow my typical training, nutrition, tactics, mental game format. But as we got into this conversation, pretty quickly, Hannah opened up to me and she shared that she was feeling quite a bit of anxiety about having the conversation. I think she was just, feeling like a little bit of a panic attack that was coming on. And so we just kind of stopped and took the conversation in the direction that it wanted to go, which predominantly was peeling back and exploring the mindset, the mental game aspect of climbing and also of just being a person. And Hannah, I'm so grateful that she was open and was able to be vulnerable and allow us to go down this path, because whether we as humans are experiencing anxiety en route, maybe a fear of falling or a fear of failure, or just in life, like social anxieties at work or expectations to perform and do great, or in social situations like at a party, whatever the case may be, climbing actually offers a pretty good and controlled way to explore those feelings and maybe to even learn how to manage them. And Hannah brought that into this conversation. In fact, how she is able to manage certain fears and anxieties en route, on rock, like she's done as she's pushed herself out of her comfort zone in pretty significant ways, like climbing the Red Bull Dam and doing that really high deep water solo over the Thames River. These are pretty gripping situations to put yourself into. I've never been in a situation like that. I'm not sure how I would handle it, but she's pushed herself into that, and in pushing herself out of that comfort zone in climbing, it's helped her to realize some things about how she could handle situations out of her comfort zone in her real life. So we get into all of that. I give a little bit of a primer on that now, because if you experience anxiety, we do explore that a lot in this conversation here. So just wanted you to be aware of that. But I really think it's a beautiful exploration and an important exploration. And we also get into a ton of nerdy climbing stuff. We talk about a lot of the videos that Hannah's made, a lot of the athletes and the pros that she's worked with. We talk about how to bust through plateaus, learnings from the experiments that she's done on herself, learnings from spending a day with Lynn Hill. There's so much in there, and the bonus episode is just packed full of even more. So I'm really excited for this conversation. I'm grateful for Hannah, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. All right, now just a quick little update from me and my climbing world for those who care. And you know what? It's really nice. I've actually been seeing a lot of y'all at the crag recently. For those now that we're into the fall season, the crispy temp season here at the Red, people are coming in from all over the country, all over the world, actually. I met some people from Germany the other day who listened to the podcast. So shout out to you all. Guten Tag. I hope I said that right. And yeah, just I really appreciate it. It's always so fun to have you walk up and say that you've been listening or to ask me how it's going out on the proj. I appreciate that. I talked to someone, Christy, I think was her name. Met her at the dark side. I was out there with my daughter just recently, and Christy shared with me that she's been listening to the struggle for a while and just recently sent her first 13A. Shout out, Christy. She said she hadn't even started training until just recently. I think she picked up some stuff from listening to the podcast. I cannot take credit for it, Christy. So obviously I can't take credit for it because I'm doing all the things and I still haven't sent. But I feel like the send is imminent, and Christy's send of her first 13A was super inspiring and motivating. So way to go, and way to go to all of you out there who are working hard, trying hard, and having fun. I love to hear from you. If you're not out here, if I don't get to see you like out at the gym or the crag, shoot me a note. Let me know how your training and your climbing are going. I really, really, really love to hear from you. I truly do. And I'll get back to you. And what's up for me? Well, it's been like weirdly warm at the Red, but I see cool temperatures coming up. I'm about to take a little mini climbing trip where I'm going to get a cabin out at the Red for a few days with some friends. Mostly have fun, I think. That's the goal. The goal isn't to like get project obsessed. I'll probably go get like one rip on the proj. But we're actually renting a cabin in an area where you can only access the climbing if you have a cabin there. So there's all these like stellar routes that I've never been on. So I'm really excited to check that out. And I'm going to try hard. I'm going to climb hard, but also just, mainly the goal is to have fun, keep building fitness. And then as we get towards kind of mid to late November, which is probably around when this show is going to be coming out, that's when I'm going to like get serious and go buckle down and make some Red Point goes on the project. I feel good. I feel confident. Maybe too confident. I don't know. I'm optimistic. I'm just feeling happy. Send, don't send. I'm having a blast. I'm trying hard. It's been great so far. And I really appreciate your support, not only for me climbing, but also your support of this show. So many new patrons recently. I don't know if it's because like a lot of people are maybe jumping ship from a different climbing podcast, or if it's just that you all are appreciating the hustle that I'm doing over here. I'm grateful for it. Welcome to the struggle if you are a patron or Apple subscriber. If you're not, you can join for free. There's a free option and also a free trial. So anyway, check those out. Appreciate it. Hustling over here for you. And now let's hustle into this interview. I'm so psyched. She's just one of the most engaging climbers in the game. I love the content that she's putting out there. Let's have some fun with Hannah Morris.
We were just out in Fontainebleau for a couple of days. We travelled over to watch the Olympics and spent a couple of days in the forest, and it was really nice to be out there, but yeah, a little bit too hot to actually do more than a few moves without needing to sit in the shade and chug some water for a bit. So
I haven't climbed out there, but the reputation is that it's already pretty slippery and slopey, and so you don't want to add a bunch of extra sweat to the hands, I don't think.
No, definitely not. Definitely best enjoyed in like, I think some people would argue maybe winter, like when it's really cold, but I think I maybe prefer it in like early spring or into the autumn, partly because the forest is just beautiful at those times, but also because, especially when it's super humid, it can get in that kind of like cold where you can't feel your fingertips after one move, which I know some people love, but for me, I don't know, rather be able to enjoy my day out rather than feeling in pain because it's too cold.
Yeah, be able to just like be comfortable and have fun climbing. What a novel concept. Oh, well, I'm excited to dive in and talk about like enjoying climbing for once. It's a little refreshing, on this show. I talk to predominantly like super elite climbers and have a lot of conversations about, your first V16 or your first 515A or 9A plus or whatever. And so, it's nice to talk to a fellow climber who's out there climbing really well and really hard, but maybe not pushing the top end of the grades or, the cutting edge of the sport. It's going to be, I think, a refreshing conversation for a lot of listeners as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably one of the pieces of feedback that I receive most often is it's nice to, I guess, like relate to somebody climbing the same grades that maybe you're climbing or aspiring to climb. Whereas I think a lot of climbers, I don't know, it's kind of like the difference between what's like inspirational and aspirational, isn't it? Like a lot of us are incredibly inspired by athletes pushing elite grades, but we know that we're probably never going to get there ourselves. So it's nice to look to, people climbing the same grades as you for like empowerment, maybe.
Yeah, totally. Well, I can feel that. And that's what I try to do with this show is because I'm like the everyman, I'm like the dad with a couple of kids and a job and I'm a weekend warrior. I try to relate the conversations that I'm having with elite climbers to make it useful and relatable for me as well. And I've learned a lot, I've learned a lot through having those conversations. Of course, you've spent some time in the gym and out on rock with some of the most elite rock climbers in the world as well. And so we'll probably talk about a bit of those experiences and maybe juxtapose the elite with the amateur. And yeah, I'm excited. You've been one of the most requested guests to have on the show. Are you ready to go? Should we just jump right in?
Yeah, let's do it. Let me just pull up. I've made a couple of notes here and there in case I do completely lose my way. So I'll just pull those out.
Thank you for preparing. You're already ahead of pretty much any other guest I've ever had on this show by actually making some notes. So thank you.
I imagine we'll probably get into like why later on in the episode. It's definitely actually a habit that I'm trying to break is constantly feeling the need to be kind of like prepared and ready for anything. But yeah, it does mean that sometimes maybe I'm over prepared a lot of the time.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, maybe in the mindset chapter we can explore that a bit. I think I share that with you, and that's something I've been pushing myself as a podcaster to. I work with a coach, and she's like, maybe don't script every intro that you do. Maybe just try to have like a casual intro and like make some mistakes. And you know what? Maybe don't edit out those mistakes. Maybe leave those mistakes in there and just like see what people think. And I'm like, no, I can't. Yeah. It must be perfect.
Yeah, that sounds so familiar. It's just that feeling of like, not being in control of something completely. I think for a lot of climbers as well is like, we need to be in control of all the variables and have prepared for like every eventuality, or else we're not in control, and that feels very dangerous. So,
yeah, there's a little bit of a personality trait amongst us climbers that carries over. We're not all exactly the same. We're all, there may be some common themes that can be connected through many of us. And well, one of the themes of my show is struggle, and that's where I like to start off every conversation that I have here is just look at struggle through the lens of rock climbing. And what does that mean to you, Hannah? What is your relationship with struggle as a climber?
That is a really good question. One of my kind of like recurring and persistent struggles is I really struggle with anxiety, but specifically social anxiety. And a lot of the time, I find that it has a really like debilitating impact on my ability to communicate in the way that I feel like I want to. And the way that I try and mitigate that all of the time is to go into every kind of situation where I feel maybe a little bit nervous or uncomfortable, like prepped to the hill so that nothing can come as a surprise.
Right.
And I feel like that's what I've done in thinking about like what questions might be fielded during like a podcast situation and how might I answer them, because I really want to answer them well. And I want to get across like all of the messages that I wanted to get across in a way that I feel happy with. And so I'm very aware that I feel really anxious, like nervous, the point where like I feel like I'm in fight or flight. And I guess the reason I'm telling you all of that is because I think it's really important context for how I might come across. Does that make sense?
Totally. First of all, it's not an easy thing to just like come right out and share that. And so I really appreciate you doing that. My wife has struggled with anxiety her entire life. I'm quite accustomed to kind of what some of the signs are of it. And I can empathize with you and with her. My son also, struggles with anxiety and social anxiety. So just sharing that, I know took a ton of energy, and you're probably like a little bit out of your head right now. I'm curious if you don't mind sharing, because you said you're feeling it, you're feeling like this fight or flight. Like, what does that feel like in your body? Like, what's the physical sensation when that comes on?
So the way that it presents in me most often is that kind of like you're on stage but you've forgotten your lines feeling of like complete blind panic, and just this awareness that your like mind as you know it is not accessible to you at this time. So like I really find it, or I really notice it in kind of like my like short-term memory just goes. You could ask me my name and I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Right.
Like my access to language and vocabulary, I find that goes completely. And then that kind of snowballs into an experience of second guessing how I might be being perceived. And typically that the feedback loop that I experience is never like, oh, maybe no one's noticing, or maybe I'm getting away with it. It's always like everybody can see that you feel really nervous, but because they can see it, they think that you're not very intelligent, or they think that you don't have anything interesting to add to the conversation, or whatever it may be. It's always this like spiraling.
Yeah, it's like spiral. Totally.
Sure. And I find it's incredibly frustrating because it shows up every time something means a lot to me. It's there, feeling like a hurdle. And yeah, every single time I feel like if I could just find a way to like calm myself down, then I could do so much more. I think what's super interesting and what I was hoping to be able to talk about was how having the YouTube channel has actually been a massive part of my journey to finding a voice and feeling like people do want to listen to what I have to say, and I can find connection with other people, and I can share my thoughts in a way that's kind of more on my own terms and less terrifying. But also I can push my comfort zone with it and build confidence.
What struck me right there, and maybe totally off, but I've talked to climbers on this show who have said they got into climbing because they were afraid of heights or they're afraid to fall. And was it a conscious choice to start the YouTube channel because you wanted to try to expand that horizon, or is it just something that you discovered along the way?
I think at the beginning, no, it wasn't a conscious choice. It was, I think the YouTube channel was really born out of a need for connection that I wasn't necessarily like consciously aware of.
Because this was during the lockdown, right? When
so I started the channel a long time ago, but my climbing content, I really started that much later. So maybe 2021, maybe end of 2020. So yeah, right in the middle of the pandemic. And I think for me, I'd always been interested in like film and photography, and it was a creative outlet. It was something to do when like climbing gyms were shut and I couldn't go and see my family. But I think it was also a way for me to communicate in a way that I didn't feel comfortable doing in my kind of real life a lot. But I think it's interesting that I kind of started the climbing content at the time that I did, with it being kind of slap bang in the middle of the pandemic, because I think whether or not you experience like feelings of isolation because of anxiety, everybody at that time in one form or another was experiencing disconnection and isolation. And I think it's only really in the years after having started the channel and like looking back and reflecting on the reasons why I might have started, or the reasons that I chose to take it in the direction that I did, that I've kind of been like conscious of how much of an effort it was for me to find my own voice and communicate, I think.
Thank you for doing it, because I love the channel. I love the content. I love the tone. It's just it's really a joy. And also for a fellow amateur climber, I learned a lot for your videos. So it's great. Like I get good beta. So yeah, I'm really happy you did it. And yeah, hopefully this conversation here, I don't want this conversation to be like exhausting or, like nerve wracking. And so is there anything that I can do to help make it more comfortable? Or is it just going to be torture?
No, I don't think so. I think weirdly, starting by mumbling through an explanation of being anxious, that's not really something I've ever done before. I've sat through like so many meetings with people, important meetings with people where I've been kind of like having basically a panic attack for an hour or two, but feeling like I don't know, I don't have maybe the language, or I don't just feel confident enough to say, actually, this is how I'm feeling, and that might affect like how I spend the rest of this meeting. So I think, yeah, I wanted to say something, I think, because I didn't want to waste your time, for one, but also I think by being kind of like vulnerable, it's like my worst fear is being found out, right? It's like, right. Oh no, someone's going to know that I feel really anxious, and I'm going to be awkward with someone. And it's like, well, what happens if it's kind of an experiment in being like, well, what happens if I just say, like, actually, I feel super anxious right now, and I think in doing that, it's the worst has happened, right? Like, I've made a fool of myself in front of you, and that's quite new to me. Like,
yeah, and what happened? How do you feel now?
Well, yeah, like not as bad as I might expect. I think partly because you've been very understanding and very kind.
You seem lighter, It is interesting when we identify the thing. It kind of takes the power away from the thing, don't you think? Like, it doesn't mean it's gone, right? And I don't deal with anxiety. I mean, I've had my share of panic attacks. My wife can always tell because she's dealt with it her whole life. Like, she'll see me like walk into the kitchen and just start like pounding food or whatever. And she's just like, are you having a little bit of a, I'm like, no, it's not that. I'm just hungry. And she's like, I think, why don't we come over here and do some breathing? And like, I never can recognize it as fast as she can recognize that in me because she's been working through it her whole life. But to identify, I don't know, to bring it back to something as kind of inconsequential as climbing, but it is a climbing show. I struggled for a very long time with fear of falling. I started climbing out west, trad climbing, and it was very much like, don't fall, don't push yourself too hard, like let's just go up stuff that we know we can protect well and get to the top of. And so I rarely fell, like almost never fell for my first, 8 years of climbing or something. And then we moved to Kentucky to the Red River Gorge. And so it's all overhung sport climbing. Have you been out here to the Red?
No, never. We've spent a lot of time on the West Coast, but never really ventured much further than like Salt Lake.
Well, at some point we got to get you out to Kentucky because it's great climbing. And the style is very much like just climb till you fall. It's all bolted and everybody just climbs really hard and falls. And it was so hard for me for a couple of years, like gripped and kind of a little bit ashamed of being so scared because I was climbing with friends who were just used to and accustomed to that kind of thing. And so I didn't admit that it was I had fun, but it was always in like the back of my head. Like I was like, are they going to find me out that I'm so scared of falling? And so I wasn't pushing myself. I was always climbing things that were within my ability to just like clip the chains, or I would get on something and not try. I would just hang at every bolt and just be like, oh yeah, I'm just checking this out, but just because I didn't want to fall. And then as soon as I did some studying and did some reading, and I've had Hazel on the show a couple of times here, and what really changed the game for me with my fear of falling was it's a 2-hour drive. And when we would drive out to the Red, me and like the crew I was going out with that day, I would say during the drive, hey guys, I just want you to know, like, I'm scared of falling. And so when we get out there, I'm going to try and take some like little falls or whatever. And, they were like, yeah, cool. Like they didn't give a shit, like I was like, oh, they're going to laugh or whatever. They didn't care. They were just thinking about what they wanted to climb. Nobody really cares about what anybody else is doing anyway. And so, but as soon as I shared that, it like kind of released, I don't know, it like took this like weight off my shoulders. And I don't know if that's a similar experience. I don't want to suppose that you just had a similar experience in kind of sharing with me at the start of this thing that you were feeling, some anxiety. But at least for me, as soon as I like kind of at the start of the day, it was like, before I even started climbing, I was like, I'm afraid to fall, so I'm going to work on that. It made the rest of my day like a little bit more enjoyable, I guess, or it just kind of took some of the power away from that fear of falling. And yeah, I don't know if that's what you're experiencing or not, but I appreciate you sharing it regardless.
No, I think so, definitely. I think it not only takes the power away from that thing that you were scared of happening because it's happened. And so that fear of it happening is gone.
Right.
I guess the fear of it happening again is still present.
Right.
But I also think it gives the power back to you because you've called a shot on something and shown yourself that you've got the reins in your hands.
Yeah.
And yeah, it doesn't completely get rid of your fear of falling or your fear of having a meeting or whatever it may be. But I think it reminds you when you feel able to take a decisive action that it is you that calls the shots. I think it's really interesting that for as anxious a person as I have been my whole adult life, it's really not translated into my climbing often, which is something that I've always been interested in. I struggle with fear of falling. I do get scared when I'm climbing. I think that's a completely normal part of the climbing experience. But I have never really had the feelings that I hear other people communicate around like being afraid to fall in front of people or being afraid to be vulnerable in not being able to make a move or not being strong enough to try a grade that's like above their pay grade. I think because climbing has always been for me this kind of incredible vehicle for me to play with the feeling of not being in control. And I think because fear and uncertainty are kind of an expected part of climbing, I think really on in my climbing journey just kind of accepted them as part and parcel of the experience. Whereas I think my social anxiety I find a lot more difficult to accept in myself because for some reason I've decided that's not a typical part of everybody's experience. It's not something that, we all deal with. Although I think it probably is to a greater extent than I always appreciate. But yeah, climbing for me has always been the area of my life where I've felt most in control and most able to be decisive and confident. And that's not because I'm climbing the hardest grades, but more so because, I don't know, I think I just have this kind of awareness of climbing as this really empowering influence in my life and this thing that I can have fun with. There's no pressure on it.
Yeah, I think that's maybe one of the biggest differences between the professional athletes that I speak to and my friends or you or me, where our career and our self-image and maybe our self-worth isn't wrapped up in whether we top that boulder or we clip the chains. Now, it can be sometimes. I mean, I don't know. I get swept up sometimes in really wanting to do the thing that I say I want to do. But yeah, I think it's a slightly different perspective where climbing for you is for joy and for just pleasure and personal growth and challenge, I'm sure, and in all the things that go into climbing and make climbing exciting. But your performance on a climb, it doesn't have a whole lot of impact on other aspects of your life, right? It would for the pros, if they could get a sponsor deal or something if they did this route. That isn't something that we tend to face in our amateur climbing.
Yeah, I think that's also interesting because, yeah, you're right. I absolutely climb for joy and I have goals in climbing, but my career doesn't depend on it. In fact, I think my career on YouTube has probably been more successful because I don't climb that hard.
Right.
So it's almost kind of quite on brand I don't have that pressure because I don't need to be climbing hard. But then I also think that there's an interesting lens on that, climbing for joy that is there because I climb online and I have an audience of people that watch me climb and watch my progression and have sometimes criticism to level at my climbing. And so I think that's always been difficult to navigate. But then again, what I've always found super interesting in that kind of climbing for an audience or having an audience or the feeling of being perceived as a climber and how does that affect how I feel about my own climbing.
This episode is supported by Rungni. Y'all know Rungni. It's Magnus Mitbo's company. Oh my gosh, they make incredible stuff, you guys, okay? Chalk, apparel, accessories, chalk bags, chalk buckets. It's all there over on their website. What are my favorites? Okay, well, right now, I'm using their liquid chalk every time I go out and have a session. It's called Mag Juice, first of all. So boom, you've already got my money. But then, God, it works really, really well. I rub it on my palms, my fingers, and it's like my base layer. I don't then have to chalk up as much when I'm climbing, whether it's a gym session or out at the crag. Less time chalking up means more time actually climbing and hopefully landing moves and not punting off my project. And then the apparel's fantastic. I've got all their super soft sweatshirts and their tees are amazing. But my absolute favorite, I think you guys know this, are their harness pants. They are stretchy, they are durable, they are attractive. I love the cut, I love the feel. They are the best dang pants in the game. And right now you can get 15% off pretty much everything over at Rungni by using code STRUGGLE. And then you can add that on top of their free shipping bundles. So especially if you're listening in the US where you would get hit with shipping, they're giving you free shipping with their free shipping bundles, and you can add code STRUGGLE on top of that. Hit that link in your show notes to stock up on chalk, to get those threads that you've been wanting for your climbing and your lounging, and use code STRUGGLE for 15% off. This episode's supported by Crimped, and I want to talk about how I'm using Crimped and Crimped Plus to program my training. So I've been using Crimped for many, many years, long before there was a podcast. In fact, I attribute going from 510 to 12A in about a year by getting disciplined and serious with my training and using Crimped to keep me on track. So when I was doing that, I was using their preloaded climbing plans. They've got like 75 different workouts created by world-class coaches and climbers right there in the app, and you can just load it. Like, oh, I want sport fitness, boom, it goes in there. In fact, there's a playlist now that I created for developing sport climbing fitness. So you can just go down there and select that and it'll like load right in there for you. But now what I'm doing more often is actually getting really specialized, and I'm using Crimped Plus to program my own training very specifically week after week. And I am far more consistent with my training when I've got things programmed in Crimped. There's like a gamification element to the training. So at the end of each week, you're really motivated to close out those bars. It feels really good. I'm super busy with work and the family and all of that, but when I have my workouts programmed right there in Crimped, I just get them done. You can swing over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/crimped to try it for free and take your climbing to new heights. Let me know how it goes. This is something that you and I kind of uniquely share, and I am curious on your thoughts of that, because I'm an amateur climber and a weekend warrior, but since doing this show and having it gain, the popularity that it's gained, there are more people who are like invested in my personal journey as a climber, which is cool. It's like 99.9% really cool. Like I love talking with people, and oftentimes I get like really great supportive messages and some ideas and tips and beta on the route that I'm working on. Some, rarely do I get like trolling or criticism. Fortunately, it's not very common. But while the reality is probably that there's not like a whole lot of people out there that care all that much if I do the thing like I'm talking about doing. Like I'm trying to climb my first 13A or 7C plus route out here at the Red River Gorge, and I set that goal for last year and I got very close but didn't quite do it, and so I'm still like kind of continuing this journey. It's been a huge struggle, but like in my mind I'm like, oh man, I really got to do this because I've been talking a lot about it and people are invested in it, and the reality is like probably most people don't really care that much if I do it or not. They're kind of just along for the ride. But in my mind, I'm like, well.
And I wonder if, like you said, people might be invested because they've like followed the podcast for a while, and it'd be nice if you sent your project and they'd be psyched for you. But I wonder if part of the pressure that we feel might be coming from like an awareness of an audience is actually just kind of how we feel about ourselves. And we're just finding a way to apply pressure without having to understand why it is that we feel that way about us, like why it's important to us that we send that, why it's important to us because it is such a big part of our identity as a climber. And I think it's almost easier to put it on pressure from having built an audience, or there's people watching, and it's like, yes, there's people watching, but how they feel about whether or not I send my climb really has nothing to do with me. Whereas how I feel about whether or not I send that climb has everything to do with me, and feels like a huge can of worms that we don't always want to open.
Well, I mean, that's just the most exciting part of this whole thing for me, at least, is that mindset. And climbing is hard and physical and flow and all that are great, but there's just so much that goes into the mental aspect of climbing. And yeah, I've had a few conversations with Hazel. I've had a couple conversations with Nina Williams, a conversation with Laura Sabarin. And every time we like dive into the mental game, I leave it, I think, more aware, like it's broadened my view. I've gone from like a more narrow view of my climbing and my motivations to a much, broader view. But like I can, like, there's just so much more. There's so much more I think I can open up and gain on that side. And a lot of it is like self-reflecting that I'm resistant to do. Like, I don't know, I'm just more comfortable talking to other people about their struggles and insecurities than I am about looking inside myself. But I am working on that. And I'm curious for you if there are tools that you've developed in your personal life, like with your social anxieties, which sounds like that's been, a bigger part of your life that you've been working through than like anxieties with your climbing. But it sounds like the anxieties with your climbing, you've been able to manage quite well. I heard you say, it was a video that you did, maybe it was like the Deepwater Soling one, or when you were talking about Red Bull, it might've been this most recent one you did on the North Face, DWS, where you talked about the nerves or the anxieties that come up in the anticipation of the thing far dwarf the actual thing. And so that really struck me when I was watching that. And, are there tools that you've put to use in managing that for your climbing that have carried over into your personal life or vice versa?
Yeah. So I think in my climbing, I think I've become quite adept at understanding what things I can and can't control and where and when it's useful to ruminate on the things I can't control. And yeah, I think being very aware of how much of a negative impact getting into a bit of a spin about things that I might not be able to change in the moment, how unhelpful that can be, I think has really helped me with being able to be, I guess, more decisive and confident in my decision making as I'm climbing. Like, I feel like I'm quite good at sorting out a kind of like, I'm feeling this. If I continue to feel this, is this going to help me make the next move? Or is it going to cause me to make a mistake and fall off? And then like deciding what to do from there. I'm not really sure why. Like, this is a big frustration of mine generally, is that I feel like I reflect a lot on like why I feel what I feel in my climbing. I'm quite like considerate, mindful, thoughtful climber. And I've always approached my climbing that way, but I can't seem to apply that same, I don't know if I want to call it resilience, but let's call it resilience for now. I can't apply that same resilience to my day-to-day life. It seems like I need to be climbing to feel like I'm in that gear. It's
right.
Like, I feel like climbing has taught me so many lessons that I'm waiting to apply to my real life. And I think I have. Like, maybe I don't always give myself enough credit for how different I feel in my day-to-day life after 10 years of climbing than when I first started climbing.
Right.
But I'm still figuring out how to take all of the things that I've learned in my climbing life and really apply them to make me a more confident person rather than a more confident climber.
Life is very dynamic. There's just so many more variables. So it makes sense that climbing feels like you've got a little bit more figured out there compared to, the 95% of everything else. But how cool that you even have that awareness, that you're starting to recognize with your climbing that you're able to have a bit more control and confidence over that. And you mentioned, I wonder if you could get a little specific with some examples, because you mentioned in climbing, you're able to become decisive with regard to like what you can control versus what you can't control. And could you give me an example of that?
Yeah, I guess I've had a few experiences in the time that I've been like making videos on the channel where I've really been out of my comfort zone and feeling quite scared of things that are quite like tangible. So I think I've had a lot of experiences where the fear that I'm feeling is kind of, it meets the level of risk, right?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
There's a reason why I'm feeling scared, and that's because I am in danger.
Right, exactly.
Whereas a lot of the time, I feel scared and I'm not really in danger.
Right.
I feel like I am, but I'm not. Maybe someone might think that I fluff my words, but really, like, it's not a threat to me or my life. Whereas in climbing, I mean, I boulder a lot, so it's rare that I'm in a situation where I feel like a wrong move could, really threaten my safety seriously. But there have been times where I'm thinking most recently, maybe when we climbed the Red Bull dual ascent out in Switzerland, where for as much as I do recognize that was probably the safest environment for me to do a multi-pitch climb in, because there were safety teams everywhere, there was also, like a very real element of risk. And if I made a mistake, then that could be a serious mistake. And I think in those situations, I think I almost go into a quite pragmatic way of thinking where I'm like aware of what might accelerate or make like compound fear and make the situation worse and make it so that I'm more shaky and make it so that I can't think straight. And so in those situations, I can operate in a more decisive and more confident way. Maybe because there's more at stake. Like when I'm, feeling a bit uncomfortable in a meeting, if I make a wrong step, I've got more to play with. Like I'm not going to fall down the edge of a cliff.
Right.
I don't know if there's like a conscious checklist that I go through. I think it's more just, that awareness of being like, no, you really have to focus on what you're doing.
Yeah. How was that, by the way? I mean, just that, like, I saw the video. I mean, I've seen others climb on it. It's crazy. And I've climbed a lot of multi-pitch. I've been on, some really big kind of gnarly climbs, but there's something about like climbing up a dam. I don't know. It just like, it almost seemed more exposed than when I've done multi-pitch out in nature. And so, for you to push yourself into that place, like when you came out of it, do you feel that it was a beneficial stretching of your comfort zone, or was it a little much?
Yes, I think it was a beneficial stretching. I think it very nearly ventured into snap. Like I'm always aiming to stretch, but not snap.
Right.
And I think that was probably one of the experiences where I like flew quite close to the sun. I think because there was so much about that experience that was brand new. That was my first multi-pitch. And I think just the way that you climb the Red Bull dual ascent dam as well is like, rather than going from ground up, you abseil in off the top and like lower down to where you're going to climb from, and then you climb. So it's almost like the worst part comes first.
Yeah,
and then
totally.
After that, it's kind of, it only gets better because you get closer to it. I don't want to say it being over. That's how I felt before going into the experience. As soon as I'd done that abseil over the top, all of the anticipation and the fear and the what if I like make a catastrophic mistake whilst I'm belaying and drop my partner off the edge of this dam, that all went away. And I was like, this is so cool. Like, I want more time on it. I want to do it again. I want to try the harder route. And that kind of like instantaneous flip, that really kind of told me that so much of the fear and the stretching, it was just the unknown. It was just that I'd never done it before and I didn't know what it would feel like and I didn't know how hard the route would be and there were so many things that I didn't know. On top of that, there was also the slight stress of knowing that we were producing a YouTube video alongside. So I'm like kind of half thinking about that, half thinking about this, try to keep myself alive. But it was a beneficial stretch for sure. I think because it was maybe the most scared I've been climbing to date. And I really got to show myself through the experience that I was more in control than I thought. And it was more enjoyable than I expected it to be, which just it gave me that real like I can do hard things. I can be really scared and still do something. And then slowly your kind of like bar raises and your confidence raises. And before you know it, you're doing things that you really didn't think that you ever would.
Such a cool growth experience. How often do you find yourself seeking that out Like what's your ratio to chill climbing? It's all good. No fear, no pushing myself out of the comfort zone to like, when does that bug start to whisper in your ear where it's like, oh, I should go do something a little sketchier like you just recently did in the Thames?
Surprisingly often, I think this is something that I don't feel I quite understand about myself just yet, but I really like being out of my comfort zone. And I think for someone who spends basically all of the time when they're not climbing trying to feel safe and in their comfort zone, with my climbing experiences, I really enjoy being scared. Like as an example, I really enjoy high balls. Like I really like being in situations where I'm like, oh, like I really feel scared here. And I really enjoy it in kind of like my, I don't know, like skill acquisition in climbing. I really enjoy working on stuff that I know I'm pretty bad at because, okay, it's not like scary per se, but it's uncomfortable and it's a challenge to like my ego, and it's just something that I really enjoy. I think because I spend so much time feeling uncomfortable and worried and anxious, having that experience be one that's on my own terms and kind of like on home turf, I find really like therapeutic. And so I think I seek it out a lot.
That's great. It's one of the benefits of climbing is that we do get to explore that territory, maybe more so than if it were a different sport. And it's so interesting to me, Hannah, that you're like highballing and just bouldering in general. I mean, we're just, everybody's got their own flavor. But for me, I'm so much scareder of bouldering than I am taking a 40-foot winger off of a sport route. And because like I just hate ground falls, like I don't, even if it was just like 3 feet, I'm like, oh, I could twist my ankle or blow my knee out, or anything that's higher, like top outs. Oh my God, top outs outside where you got to like beach whale your way over this thing, and like it's all so scary to me. And maybe it's just because I haven't done it very much, but it's interesting to me that's a more comfortable place for you than, I don't know, a different climbing high, but just like being on a rope.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that. So many sport climbers that I speak to, like say the same, that I find sport climbing way more scary than I find bouldering. And I do think that it's like I started out bouldering and I've been bouldering for like a decade, just over. So maybe it's the familiarity. But I think even at the beginning of my climbing experience, I don't know if it's just a perspective of like because I'm so scared so often, maybe like being scared climbing just was like, oh yeah, like I'm kind of used to it. I don't know. Yeah. I do this every day. Like it's not as scary to me.
This episode is supported by patrons of the show. So if you're a patron, thank you so much. Actually, if you're a patron, you're not hearing this right now because you get ad-free episodes. But maybe you would think about becoming a patron, and that would really mean the world to me. If you got a few bucks a month, there's a free trial, so you can check it out first. But if you got a few bucks a month, I'm working really hard over here in the podcast/utility closet to bring you this interview and so many others that hopefully are helping you to level up your climbing or just bring some joy to your day, or maybe give you something to listen to when you're pretending to work. Hey, if you're pretending to work right now and you're listening to this podcast, way to go, hero. I approve. Anyway, if you've got it in you to support me, if you want to get access to all sorts of bonus episodes with the likes of Adam Andra, Alex Honnold, Nina Williams, Hazel Finley, Tyler Nelson, so many more. Basically, every guest I've ever had on has done a bonus episode with all sorts of cool extra tips on training and tactics and that kind of thing. You get that entire library, over 100 hours of bonus episodes and pro clinics and uncut videos and all sorts of sneak peeks and the ability to ask questions to guests before they come on the show. All of that stuff is available for like $5 or $7 a month, depending on which tier you pick, over at the Struggle Patreon. So that's patreon.com/The Struggle Climbing Show. Thanks so much. It takes a ton to do this. You're awesome. The community is awesome. If you can't afford to do it, I totally get it. But if you can, I'd really love your support, and I think you'll get a lot of value from it. Okay, let's get back to the interview. I love getting other perspectives. And I do think it is a matter of exposure in a sense, or just experience. And if I were to take a full season and do a lot of outdoor bouldering, I'd probably have a totally different feeling about my fears around that. It's just that I so rarely go outdoor bouldering that, it's maybe like once or twice a year. I'll do, gym bouldering, but those are climb, drop off, land on the pads. But the outdoor, it's just like such a different vibe. Maybe I just need to do a little bit more of that, push myself out of that. Well, thanks look, we just kind of took this idea of the kind of the mindset chapter and made it almost the entire interview. But I'm so glad we did, because I think that especially weekend warriors, amateur climbers, we deal with different types of fears or anxieties or uncertainties around our climbing than pros. For the most part, all the pros that I talked to got over fear of falling when they were kids. I talked to Tom Randall quite a bit on this show, and he still hates falling. But it's so interesting because he's off in Berlin doing some crazy free solo urban climbing right now. And so he's obviously found a way to manage that as well. But for the most part, it's not something the pros deal with as much. And just kind of the anxieties in general, to just kind of explore that with you has been really nice. We're having such a real conversation here. I appreciate you just being so honest and vulnerable. Not an easy thing to do. We just met an hour ago, and we're diving into the realest life shit. So it's all good. Do you know what the physiological sigh is? Do you listen to Andrew Huberman, the Huberman Lab at all podcast?
No, I'm familiar, but I haven't ever listened, and I don't know what the physiological sigh is.
I'm going to do one right now, and I'll teach it to you and to the audience. Okay. But it's this. It's a way to breathe that we do subconsciously. You'll hear dogs do it a lot. Do you have any dogs?
Yeah, I do.
So the way dogs sigh when they get really comfortable and they finally kind of curl into their spot, you take a full breath and you pause for a second, and then you take a second breath that just takes your lungs kind of beyond full, and then you blow it out very slowly, longer than the inhale. And anytime we exhale longer than an inhale, it sends a message to our dinosaur brain that we're safe, that we're comfortable. If we breathe more inhales to exhales, we're fight or flight. We're preparing ourselves. We're getting our adrenaline going. Every time we do a long exhale, twice as long as the inhale, it tells our bodies that we're safe, kind of, subconsciously. And you'll notice dogs do this when they finally curl into their spot. They do this kind of 3-step breath where you go, and I work on that with my kids and, my wife. And you'll notice it with your dogs, the way they sigh, the way they take this big, deep, kind of double-staged inhale, and then just and they just sigh.
What could you possibly have to be sighing so deeply about? What's bothering you?
It's the weight of the world is on our dogs. We always make that joke all the time. We're they always think they've got it so bad. They never remember the last meal they had. They just ate a treat, but now they're so sad that their treat's gone. I feel like dogs, they got it really good, but they don't realize how good they have it.
Yeah.
So anyway, the physiological sigh is that deep breath, a little breath on the final inhale, and then a slow exhale. And you do that 2 times, maybe 3 times, even just once. And there's been quite a bit of studies done on it. What is the effect on the mind and the cortisol levels and the stress response and all that. And it kind of is a way, a very proven scientific way to do in 1 or 2 seconds to tell your body that you're safe. I mean, it doesn't if you're really in a panic or something like that, it's not going to oh, I'm totally fine. But if you can feel something coming on and you can just take a few seconds to do that kind of breath, I'll do that sometimes before I start a climb. Or if I'm on a climb and I'm at a rest and I'm feeling kind of gripped, or just in life, whatever, I want to yell at my kids, I'll just try to take a second to do that. And it usually kind of gives you the second to take control over the mind, to get out of the amygdala hijack, they call it. I read this book. I'll try to remember it and put it in the show notes. But it's a book about raising kids, but it's really just a book about life and, the whole brain child. And so anyway, it talks about when we go into that fight or flight, we are no longer able to make rational decisions. We don't think rationally. You notice you lose vocabulary, and that we're fully in the dinosaur, the amygdala, which is the almond in it's the first brain. It's the lizard brain. And you can't reason with somebody that's in that, or you can't reason with yourself. So the idea is to get kind of move outside of that layer and move into more of our more developed brain so that we can use some analytical thinking. But the way to do that, or one of the ways to do that, is to take control of our breathing. So anyway, just a little tangent there. You probably know all this stuff already. You talk to the same people that I talk to.
Yeah, not so much. Interestingly, there's a few climbers that I've worked with that have specifically touched on breath work. And it's something that I recently started working with like a therapist. And yeah, a lot of like the kind of like methods and techniques that she's taught me have been to do with like centering your breath and just really kind of like simple tactics that just really bring you back into kind of like yourself and right now. But I'm always surprised that I haven't heard those techniques from more of the climbers that I've worked with, because it seems like there would be such a huge overlap. And I'm sure that they are using them. They're just haven't spoken to me about it.
Yeah. Or maybe they're freaks. A lot of the like total elite climbers are just like freaks. They're in the best way. They're just, genetically at the 0.0001%, and maybe aren't aware of how truly gifted and maybe even beyond their abilities they could go if they actually implemented and did more. If they took advantage of all the things us humans, normal people, are trying to do to just climb our first V6, maybe they could unlock that. I had a conversation with Chris Sharma about this, because I'm like, God, like, you're the best. You've been the best in the world forever, and you like almost never train. You don't really do anything. He's like, yeah, it's, I'm just like kind of doing my thing or whatever. And it's so fun. Like, it's an interesting thought experiment. Like, what if Chris Sharma trained like Adam Ondra or me or whatever, trained like the person who wasn't, incredibly gifted, like Tommy Caldwell or something. Tommy says, I never had the gifts that Chris Sharma had, but my gift is that like I can just train like crazy. So it's interesting to think about, like, what if some of these elite climbers trained, but then maybe they wouldn't be themselves, or maybe it would change kind of how they climbed. Like Chris is just such a flowy climber, and he just climbs all the time, and he probably gets that from climbing all the time. So, but an interesting thought experiment to think about, like, what if some of these tactics were implemented by the best in the world?
Yeah, I think like you said, though, that is what makes climbing so interesting, that there's so many different approaches and such different application of skill, that if everybody used all of the same tactics, then like, would it be as interesting?
Right. Yeah. Our sport is so young. It will be interesting to see where kind of how it develops. And I'd love to, we just, spent about an hour talking through like mindset, which I love. This is already like one of my favorite conversations ever.
Doing the podcast in reverse.
Yeah, we're doing it in reverse. And I'm not even gonna worry about getting to all the chapters, but I do want to geek out over like training for a little bit with you, because a lot of the videos that you make, the coaches that you work with, the athletes, you work on, technique and training and mistakes and, stuff that really, I think, can apply to all of us who are listening. And I've gotten quite a bit of really helpful tips and tricks and ideas from watching your films. So let's talk about training, but let me enter it into the way that I typically do here. And so I'll have to explore struggle just for a second, and then we can get into some specific films that you've done. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to training, where do you struggle with your training?
Oh, gosh. The word that immediately comes to mind is consistency. Yeah, consistency. Like, I think if you asked me like a question about training, practically any time throughout the whole time I've been climbing, I would have said I don't train at all. And I think maybe because I've always had this perception that training for climbing looks like a really set way, and that's like dangling off a hangboard or like doing pull-ups or weighted hangs. So if that's like how we're approaching climbing training, then I don't train. I just I climb for fun. I do whatever. I have followed a plan before, but maybe for like the odd YouTube video. And aside from that, I just free climb. But I think the reason for that is that even though I enjoy training when I do it, I just find it so difficult to find consistency with basically anything. And working with so many like amazing climbers and coaches over the last few years has really shown me that I think that is the secret sauce.
Well, how often do you climb a day or a week rather?
Well, I mean, at the minute, I'm not climbing at all because I'm injured, which has been my short-term struggle that I'm dealing with at the moment. But aside from that, I climb every other day, and sometimes I'll double up on days and have like a rest day between. So maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 times a week.
Yeah, cool. So I would say that's consistent, right? But that's, to your point, it's not off the wall training. You're in the gym climbing and you're climbing mainly for fun. But do you structure certain days? Oh, I want to work on dynamic moves this day, or I want to work on fingery things this day. Like, is your climbing part of your training, or do your sessions often look very similar?
No, my sessions always look the same. And I think this is maybe a downfall. Well, I don't know if I want to call it a downfall. It's just the way I climb is I free climb, and typically I will head into the gym, warm up, and then I'll hit like projects, and I'll just try and climb like the most challenging thing that I can find in the gym for me that day. And that it doesn't necessarily mean the hardest grade boulder all of the time. I think maybe a couple of years ago it did, but I have tried to move away from that as a mindset. And now maybe I'll identify climbs in a style of mine that's a weakness and work on that. But typically I just climb, and I climb for maybe like 3 or 4 hours, and I'll just like climb with very little structure. And I think, ironically, I mean, I do the YouTube channel full time. So like I'm in charge of my own time, but I ironically have very little time for my own climbing, if that makes sense. I'm kind of caught between loving climbing so much that I have like personal goals and I want to train towards those in a structured way, but almost having those goals be like overshadowed by wanting to just enjoy my climbing. And also I think for the channel, like working on the channel, I get the opportunity to work with lots of coaches and a like really big variety of climbers and coaches. But typically, and like when I do work with them, we'll go through a session in real time. So I will spend a very structured session working on something in particular.
Right.
But quite often we will decide on the concept of a video based on the person that we're working with and what might kind of fit them as a guest best. So I kind of flip between all different kinds of focus, and because I work with such a variety of different people, I kind of have this like amazingly comprehensive input, but it's like what's missing is the consistency. So I don't work with like one person.
Well, you just recently posted a video about board climbing and board training, and talk about struggle. Oh, for this guy, that is like numero uno struggle. There's just nothing more humbling for me than when I get on a board. So I'm curious, what your big takeaways and learnings were from getting on my least favorite, but yet probably most needed training apparatus.
I think if it's any consolation, that's like 99.9% of what I hear from climbers when you bring up board climbing,
right,
is that it is a struggle. And I think that's kind of why people love it. I'm learning is that it is so humbling and it is so hard, but there's so much to be learned. I think the reason I wanted to do a video on board climbing firstly was because of, I think, that perception that boards are just brutal. And I think they can be. And I think that's kind of, part of the appeal for a lot of people. But I also feel like they don't have to be. And I think like thinking that they are is maybe like a barrier to entry for a lot of people. I think more and more boards are like becoming more accessible. My first experience on a board was, I forget which set, but it was the moon board.
Oh.
And I think that has a reputation in climbing for being particularly difficult. So I avoided boards for the longest time. And I think working with Christian, who we filmed the video with, really opened my eyes to the fact that I was almost like sandbagging myself with this like belief that the board was like not somewhere that I belonged. It didn't suit my strengths. And I think, yeah, for those precise reasons, that's why I should be spending more time on the board. Christian and I had a session together on the Attention 2. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I'm ashamed to say I haven't actually been on a board since we filmed that video, but I left that session having like subverted a couple of my beliefs about board climbing. And yeah, I think they're great tools for like definitely like strength and power acquisition, which is something that I feel a lot of climbers struggle with.
Oh, no doubt, though. I mean, I think what boards can help you or almost force you to focus in on in a pretty short session is, for me at least, and I think a lot of climbers that I talk to, including pro climbers for that matter, is sometimes hard to get on gym sets. You know, like you can walk up to a board and like it just can kind of force a little bit more powerful dynamic climbing. And I will say I recently spent time on a TB2 as well. And the adjustable angle of it makes it much more accessible. You know, you're not starting at 40 degrees, or you certainly don't have to. You can start at, I tried a problem at 40 degrees that I couldn't do. And then I backed it off to 10 degrees and slowly worked it back down to 40 and then was able to do it. So like the adjustable boards, I think, you know, as you covered in your video, like it's a much easier entry point for a lot of people. And I really like the layout of the TB2 as well. Unfortunately, there's no gym in my area here that has one. So shout out gyms. Try to get a TB2 over here so I can feel a little bit better on the board, but it's just the moon board. But I've been doing like one session a week, and while it's humbling, I think it is exciting and it can kind of be addictive. I'm kind of sucked in now, Hannah. I have to say, like, even though it's like a big struggle, it's like also I kind of look forward to it in a sick way, and I think it probably is making me a better climber.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's proven time and time again in climbing that to improve in a kind of like meaningful way, I think you do kind of have to look to the parts of your climbing where you can humble yourself, because they're probably going to be the areas of your climbing that will teach you the most. And maybe some lessons that we don't want to learn, but I think the lessons that we don't want to learn are probably the lessons that we need to learn the most.
No doubt. Well, I do want to talk about training, like kind of specifically like structured training, some lessons that you learned. You did this video, it was a very popular video, which was how to train like a pro climber for 40 days. I believe it was the time that you committed to that. And you did make some really impressive gains on that. And so I'm curious now, looking back, like what do you think made the most impact? Like what stands out from that experience?
So yeah, I train like a pro for 40 days video was a challenge that I set myself at the beginning of this year to follow a program for 40 days and see if I got better at climbing. But in order to kind of measure that, I measured myself on a bunch of strength tests in the beginning and then at the end of the period. And yeah, I did have some really significant increase, specifically in finger strength, which I was quite shocked by. I think my training history is so little for someone who has been climbing for a really long time. So I think I was maybe able to enjoy the increase that I did because it was kind of there already. But right. I just hadn't, it was kind of a bit rusty and dusty, and I just kind of needed to blow the cobwebs away, because I think 40 days in the grand scheme of things is quite a short amount of time. And I haven't really spoken to anyone with any expertise in training on whether or not those results would be typical or expected. But yeah, I do wonder if the gains that I experienced were almost kind of born out of me just applying some focus and then like almost, I don't want to say placebo, but almost being like, okay, I've like trained for 40 days and now I'm almost expecting to be stronger. So almost like I wonder if there was like a psychosomatic element.
Yeah. But the gains were crazy. Like, I mean, it's been a while since I've seen it, but you hung a lot more weight on your fingers. You tripled the amount of pull-ups you could do, I feel like, or in weighted pull-ups. I mean, it was like It was pretty impressive jumps.
Yes. I guess probably what's like fairly important context to that video as well was that in the month prior to me starting the challenge, I did get quite sick. So maybe that could have been part of those gains being like as much as they were. Was that I probably went from like just above normal to like quite above normal. Whereas going from like normal to above normal, that jump might not have seemed quite so big.
But how did it impact your climbing? You know, so like it's interesting to measure metrics like, oh, I could hang 10 more pounds or I did 4 more pull-ups. Mm-hmm. But how did that translate to the wall for you?
So, I mean, during the challenge, I climbed a long-term project in Fontainebleau, which it's really difficult to ascribe like cause and effect. But I have tried that boulder many years on the trot and not been able to get it. And partway through, I did get it. So there's that. Then I guess my like grade has consistently gone up since January, which is when like those first 6 weeks of the year were when I completed the challenge. So again, it's like with trying to measure on indoor boulders, I think it's super difficult to say that my climbing improved. But on boulders that I had prior experience with, that I then went back to try during the challenge and after the challenge had completed, I'm climbing harder now than I was before. But I think it's super difficult to say whether or not it made any kind of like big impact in my climbing. It definitely made an impact on my strength. Mm-hmm. And I think that knowledge alone improved my confidence, my willingness to go for things that were a bit harder, and gave me the kind of like, the impetus to try a bit harder, because you've got in the back of your mind that you're stronger. Like you've just worked for 6 weeks on a training plan, so you're feeling strong.
What stands out from the training plan? I think you used a crimped plan, which I use. Like I program all my training in crimped. And I also have a playlist, like a workout playlist in crimped. Shout out to my playlist, everybody. I don't get any money if you use it, but it's just there if you want to build endurance. But, you know, when you look back at that 6-week time period, were there certain exercises or, you know, protocols that you enjoyed a lot or that you felt maybe correlated to better improvement, you know, things that you might stick with? Like what happens if you trained for 40 days and you sent your proj? Like what if you trained for another 40?
Yeah, I think for me, the parts of the plan that I most enjoyed were the things that I could like measure by numbers. That I really liked watching the number in some of my like finger strength tests go up. I made some like really nice gains in like max hang. And I think being able to just like look at a before number and an after number, I find like really motivating. So I think I probably enjoyed, the things that I could track a progression in the most. And then some of the stuff that was more like skill based that I couldn't really pin down as like, no, but how much am I improving in this exactly? It's not that I didn't enjoy them, but I think I really noticed that I'm actually really motivated by like just watching a number go up. And I really like almost like the gamification of climbing. Like I'm a person that likes to, if a gym's got like a app that you can log your climbs in and it'll give you a graph on how many you flashed this month versus how many you flashed the other month and what grade they were. And I think that's probably what would make me feel like I wanted to follow a training plan, because I don't have any kind of like concrete like goals in mind at the moment for my climbing. I've always felt like having a training plan, what am I working towards? Is it just going up in a grade? And if so, I'm not hugely motivated by that. Whereas if I can see like that I can hang like a couple of extra kilograms on my right hand side, like for some reason, I find that like I want to get to the next level. It is the gamification of it. It's like, I don't know why I want to get to the next level. It might not even help my climbing that much. It might just mean that I can hang more on a hangboard, but it feels like I've like leveled up. No,
that's a very climbery thing, is to just kind of get psyched on the numbers. You did a thing with Allison Vest, right? Testing, the strongest fingers in the world. So that's somebody who gets geeked out on numbers as well and strong fingers. That's humbling, probably, to do finger test work next to the strongest fingers in the game.
Yes. I mean, looking back on that filming day, I don't actually remember what I pulled, which I think is probably testament to the fact that it was not very memorable. Whereas what I do remember is Alison pulling the world record, just like it was the most chill, like, oh, yeah, just pulled the world record thing. Yeah, just very cool to watch. But also, like, it didn't even look like she was trying.
It's wild. I love watching her videos. She can also do it while solving a Rubik's Cube in the other hand. So shout out Allison Vest. We love you. Let me ask you, I got to get to some listener questions here in just a minute. We're just going to have to do like another conversation at some point in time because there's a lot here we won't be able to get to. But just kind of staying on some of the videos that you've shot here. You did this video with Coach B, quick wins to level up every part of your body, where it was like you and Nathan in like Coach B did this body scan. And I'm curious like what the takeaways are from that for those of us who are listening who are kind of in this same amateur journey that you're on.
I think my main takeaway from that video was that everything starts in the feet. And I think that's kind of like a nice way to like package it up. But I think really what B's getting to, and she kind of talks about everything starting in the feet, is the idea that like everything is kind of in a sequence or a chain, and that if there's a weak link in the chain, then the whole chain is affected. So I think having spent a lot of time around climbers and spoken to a lot of kind of like newer climbers, or seen the kind of sentiments that people leave in the comments, I think that it's almost like people over-focus on parts of climbing or like finger strength, whether or not they can do pull-ups. Often I'll speak to people that don't climb, and they're like, oh, I could never climb, I don't have like very good upper body strength. And I think people forget that climbing is really like a whole body activity, and that the tiniest adjustments in how you're using your feet or how your like ankles are moving or how tight your hamstrings are, like have an effect higher up or lower down the chain. So I think with that video, we were trying to, I guess, frame that idea in a like an MOT, or I don't know what the US equivalent of an MOT would be. It's like a thing that you have to send your car to every year, and they check that your car's working as it should be. Maybe you need an oil change.
Check up at the doctor or something, a wellness exam.
Yeah, but really taking a full body look at climbing movement.
Right. Yeah, it was cool. I mean, it was very interesting to watch. And for somebody like myself who I really struggle with footwork, it really does all kind of come back to the feet. You can have the strongest fingers in the world, but like if you just can't take the weight off of it by using your feet properly, you're gonna struggle. And that brings up probably my last question here so that we can get to other questions. I believe you spent some time with Lynn Hill. I haven't seen the video yet, something you're still working on, but we're talking about footwork right now, and there's just nobody better in the world than Lynn Hill with footwork. And I've had her on the show. It was the worst interview I think I ever did because I was so starstruck by her the entire time. I was just like, bleh, bleh. Like I couldn't, she was so great and gracious and basically carried the whole thing. I just couldn't believe I was talking to Lynn Hill. Mm-hmm. So what was your experience with Lynn Hill like, and what did you learn from the greatest of all time?
Probably very similar to yours. We filmed with Lynn Hill probably like this time last year when we were out in the States, and we had the incredible opportunity to go to her home in Boulder and film with her in her back garden. She has like a home wall set up, but she has a replica of Changing Corners. So we got to she pulled out some of the like archive footage of her climbing the nose, and we got to chat around that. But for the whole time, I was just kind of like pinching myself, asking how it is that I came to be sat in Lynn Hill's garden trying a replica of Changing Corners with her. But yeah, she was incredible to speak to throughout my whole climbing experience. She's been my hero, and the collaboration came about because of a conversation that I was having with Alex and Robin from rope climbing when we were in Boulder. We spent a bit of time with them, and they asked me if I could collab with anybody, who would be my dream person to work with. And I thought about it for a bit, and I said, I think it would have to be Lynn. And they were like, oh, well, she lives just down there. Like, I'll text her for you. Maybe she'd be interested in doing something. And the next day, Alex was like, she's psyched to do something with you. And it was just a real, like, for how long I'd spent, like, idolizing her, and then getting to go and work with her and having to, like, work to make this video exactly what I wanted it to be, whilst also processing the fact that I was just having a conversation with Lynn Hill, was
crazy.
Very cool experience that I'm still figuring out how to produce that video in the way that I want it to be, because it just feels like a video that I want to do justice. So it's sat in the editing room being perfected, because I want to make sure that it's just right before it goes out.
I understand the extra attention on spending time with the greatest of all time. You want it to do her justice and do it justice. And oh man, I can't wait to see it. Give me a spoiler though. Like, how hard was the changing corners? I mean, just talking with her about that, I'm like, wait a minute, you're putting your hands on what? And your feet are going, like, there's nothing there. How do you climb on nothing?
Yeah, it's impossible. It's completely impossible. And one of the holds that she's used to, like, simulate the climb is actually a stack of, like, vinyl, like, records. And they've been kind of, like, sanded down, and they're exactly as slippy as you might imagine, but apparently not as slippy as the real thing. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, I imagine that the replica in the garden is not even as hard as the real thing. So I can't even imagine.
Oh my gosh, so cool. Can't wait to see that. And that's a good segue for us to kind of wrap up the main part of the interview here, which is just the future of your channel and what your dreams and your hopes are for it, and any other things that are bringing you purpose and joy kind of outside of your personal climbing.
Yeah. So my biggest project at the moment is really, I think, getting myself to a place where I can enjoy what I'm doing a little bit more. And I don't say that because I don't enjoy what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing, and I think it's given me so many of the most, like, incredible experiences. But I think so often in those experiences I've been quite, like, inside of myself and worrying about whether or not I'm, like, getting things just so for a YouTube production, and worrying about how I'm, like, hosting the video. And I think the best part of my job is getting to spend time with and climb with some of the greats and learn from them. And I think I'm really working in my personal life to kind of get myself to a place where I can be more present in those situations and enjoy them to their full potential. I think I'm incredibly driven to build the community that I have on YouTube, because I see that people get value from it, that people find it empowering. I talked a little bit before about the difference between, like, inspiration and aspiration and empowerment. And I think one of the things that I feel most proud of is that I hope people see a little bit of themselves reflected in the channel, and that empowers them to push their own climbing or push their own comfort zone or find more confidence with their own experience of climbing. So I will continue making the videos on the channel for as long as I can, for as long as people want to watch them. And I'm really driven by this idea that I could help someone to have a more positive relationship with their own climbing, be that by, like, teaching or helping to facilitate learning on movement, or I guess showing people that if I can put myself out of my comfort zone, like, really anyone can.
All right, that wraps things up with the delightful Hannah Morris. So grateful to have just had like a totally real and vulnerable conversation that went where it wanted to go. And I got a lot out of this. I hope you did as well, not only for climbing, but just for life in general. So yeah, Hannah, thank you for opening up. Thanks for sharing your experiences on and off the rock. And congratulations. Congratulations on all that you're building over there with Hannah Morris Bouldering. We will keep an eye on your channel. If you all haven't subscribed already to Hannah's channel, make sure you go over there and do it. There's so much good stuff. And speaking of so much good stuff, there's a ton more of this conversation that's going to end up over on the bonus episode for patrons and Apple subscribers. And we dove into some really fun topics. Let me give you an overview here. We talked about the biggest mistakes that climbers make at every grade. And the takeaway on that was mind-blowing. Spoiler alert, it wasn't finger strength. It had nothing to do with finger strength. In fact, there was a common thread, and I found it really, really interesting. Then we talked about grade pyramids versus grade towers. I'm building a bit of a tower right now, full disclosure, but I really liked her perspective on that. We talked about pros and cons of climbing with people who are way better than we are. Rethinking the concept of a plateau. Okay, I really love this one. This is worth the bonus episode right here. The section about how we can rethink plateaus. There's a lot of talk about plateaus. I've talked about plateaus a lot here. I've been at a plateau myself for quite some time, but have I? This perspective that she had on plateaus is really, really interesting. We talked about what to expect when climbing outdoors for the first time, and just so much more. It's so good. You can get instant access to all of that right now at zero cost, actually, with a free trial over at patreon.com/thestruggleclimbing-show, or right there in your Apple Podcast player if you are an iPhone person. And you're also going to get instant access to more than 60 hours of other bonus content featuring the best of the best. Adam Andra, Chris Sharma, Nina Williams, Alex Honnold, and so many more athletes and coaches that have been on the show here. Plus, pro clinics on stronger fingers with Dr. Tyler Nelson, advanced bouldering with Allison Vest, moonboard with Ravioli Biceps, performance hacks with Hazel Finley, and so many more. It's all there for just a few bucks a month, or actually zero cost right now with that free trial, so you can try it before you buy it. Although, honestly, your support as patrons and subscribers is really what helps to keep this thing going. So if you got a few bucks, I certainly would appreciate your help as I'm jamming away here in the podcast/utility closet. Thank you. I love you. Big thanks and appreciation to all of our show sponsors who have brought you this episode here at zero cost. Way to go. You can check your show notes for links and special discounts from those guys that are only available to Struggle listeners. And there's some great discounts there, so check them all out. Actually, you can see all of the show's brand sponsors and special deals by popping over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/deals. Hey, did you know that The Struggle is carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation? Well, you do now, and it feels pretty good for me to write that check every month. They're doing such amazing work to bring clean energy to communities around the world. Y'all can get inspired and learn more about their amazing work over at honnoldfoundation.org, and toss them some love if you can. They're doing awesome stuff. And lastly, The Struggle is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. The show is produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin, and edited by the wonderful Glen Walker. All right, that clips the anchors on this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and supporting the show. If you want to do something that helps me out for zero cost, you could rate and review the show wherever you listen, or just share this with one of your climbing friends or the gym that you climb at. It really helps to get the word out there. I appreciate it. I hope your training and climbing are going great, and if you are struggling like me, well, just remember the struggle makes us stronger.